Hey everybody, this is Doc Mack with the Galloping Ghost Arcade Podcast. We're joined here today with Scott Lambert of the Underground Retrocade.
Yeah, Mr. Talks a Lot, that's me.
And and Brandon Diaz, who's the other repair guy over at the GGA.
Right.
Today we're going to be talking about a little bit about the future of arcade gaming and how things have been going. Scott, you've opened not too... When did you open exactly?
We opened in June.
In June?
Yep, so it's been, we just passed the year point from when we purchased our first cabinets. A lot of people come in and they'll ask, have you had these cabinets for years? Were you collecting, that sort of thing? And this look of shock on their face when I tell them, yeah, actually, we did all this in about 4 months. And they come in, we're up to a little over 70 machines now, but, it just boggles the mind that we could have filled that space that quickly.
For sure. That's one of the things, and since we've opened the Galloping Ghost Arcade, it's been great seeing like all the other places that have opened since, and definitely have become more aware of more and more arcades opening. And hopefully that's going to keep going and perpetuate arcades long into the future. There's a lot of things that led to the decline of arcades over the years, and it's great to finally see things starting to hopefully turn around. What do you think are some of the main things that make an arcade sustain in today's so console-heavy scene?
Yeah, it's, the arcade is the demented and sad but social part of gaming. And it's that last chance where people actually get together and physically interact with each other as they're playing the games. Whether it's on the game itself, playing a two-player game. I see a lot of guys that come in, and they're all about that. They're like, oh yeah, hey, you want to play a game? And they go off and they play. It's awesome. You just don't get that. Even if you're in a chat room or however these consoles work where they do the internet stuff, it's not the same as being there with your buddy and nudging him as you're playing the game, that sort of thing. Nobody can see me flapping my arms and stuff. But yeah, it's it takes it back to its roots.
For
right?
sure.
And with the Underground, we're always looking backwards at the classics. So it's what made it great then is what we're trying to find now, figure out what made it fail then, and eliminate that.
And personally, one of the things that I've always been very concerned about, especially when we were opening, was before we opened, we did a thing with the Galloping Ghost production. We did an initiative called Support Your Local Arcade. And we had approached a lot of arcade, just mom and pop arcade shops. We approached a lot of distributors, and even we're looking at games from the production element of things, and tried to find things that led to the decline. For a lot of the arcades, one of the main things was the maintenance of the machines. We had gone around, and I had actually wanted my team to have a place out in the wild to go play some Mortal Kombat 2. And it was surprising that I could not find a fully functional Mortal Kombat 2 anywhere in Chicagoland. And I had, through our Support Your Local Arcades project, we had offered to fix machines for absolutely no labor cost. They just pay for parts. Because of the Dark Presence game we're working on, we got parts really cheap. And it was amazing that not one arcade took us up on it. And as you and Brandon know, there's a heavy amount of maintenance that goes into maintaining an arcade collection, especially the size of, you've got, how many games do you have now?
And we're just over 70 arcades, and we've got 5 pins.
And it's, how often do you, tell me a little bit about your repair structure and how you go about repairing stuff.
So the first thing we do is ask anybody that comes in if they find anything wrong. It doesn't play right, doesn't seem right, definitely bring it up. Even if, if they've seen it before, just continue to remind us to make sure that we're on top of it. And, we'll be right in the middle of a Saturday rush, and I'll be happy to tear something down and make it right, because we want it to be as fun as possible for anybody that's playing it.
That in itself, that's an amazing thing. So many arcades that I've been to, again, you tell them something's wrong with it, they no intention of fixing any of it.
Right.
So, especially with that volume of machines, it's great to see that you're still taking care of everything. And
we could certainly do more. If anybody's listening that's been in and tried to play our heavy barrel, they know that we've been trying to put the sticks in that for a while. And it's one of those that's on my list, and it's always on my list. So there are games you're going to get to, and there's stuff you can fix pretty quickly. We try and fix the easiest stuff as quickly as possible. The other stuff, like, with Heavy Barrel, it's a complete teardown. I have to pull the panel all apart. Whoever built that cabinet wired the sticks directly to the board, so there's nothing to allow me to take the panel off and go work it at the front desk. So it's like, got to pull the machine. So, it's what can we keep running and have the most games up for people to play. Yeah.
What's been is Heavy Barrel the most challenging project that you've worked on so far? Or
the biggest challenge we've had, the most hours I've spent on any of our games, is pole position.
Really?
That guy's been down for, this will be 3 weeks now, and we have a lot of folks that come in and they're disappointed that it's not there. We're trying to be up front. We on our list of games, we pull it off, so we show, we don't say we have a pole position when stuff doesn't work. And I've got two weeks worth of time just every day hammering away. We've rebuilt all the power boards, swapped in 2 different sets of power boards, slipped in a power brick, just everything you could possibly do with the exception of rewiring the cabinet. We've done. It still continues to blow these transistors out, so it's frustrating. There are folks we rely on in the industry that do repair, and when I get to the point where I can't do a machine, I'll have them come take a look and maybe point me in the right direction, or we'll actually send it off to them to do it no matter what it costs. We want to have the stuff work. And the last guy I had talked to about it, he's like, MAME it. Stick a computer in it, and just like, that's not what we're about, right? We're about the original controls and displays. We're not putting LCDs in anything. It's all real. So there's not a chance I'm sticking a computer in that and taking the easy way out. No matter how reliable it's going to be, we want it to be right. So if there's a game on and you're playing it, it's going to be right.
That also is another interesting, like, with the amount of games out there, and we get that all the time, why don't you just throw a PC in there and emulate it? And it really does have to be the dedicated arcade board and for it to really matter. But
it's just not the same if you MAME it. The computer is going to make it not lag in certain places. It's just going to react completely different.
For sure.
So, it's got to be the right thing. If warts and all, whatever they were like back in the day, that's what we're trying to recreate.
So aside from pole position, is that is that top on your list of things to work on now, or?
That's one that was top for the 2 or 3 weeks that I've spent on it, and now it's kind of shuffling down to the bottom. I've got to get other stuff going. Yeah. So more recently, we fixed our asteroids, which was down for a while. I've got a turtles we're going to get up very soon. I won't get to those heavy barrel sticks probably before pole position. So we're getting there.
Cool.
Yep.
Brandon, you've been essential in keeping the arcade up and running lately. What are some of the most interesting repairs that you've seen?
It's like with the repairs, the cabinets and stuff, like a lot of it goes in, like, we have so many games over there, and like sometimes it'll be all the games will go down in the exact same way. Like there was a time when all the power supplies were failing, and then there was a time when all the monitors were failing. And then it's starting to get to this point now where, like, we've been repairing all of them so much. Now they're, like, I know when I do something now, it's, like, I'm not just going to wire it up so that it works. Now I'm wiring it up so that I know that I can go back in there and fix it again later when it will break.
Right.
And
that's just due, like, some of these machines are 35 years old.
Right.
It's like
he was saying with his control panel, they just directly wired it into the board. Now it's like, I wouldn't be doing that. I'd put some Molex connectors on there so that I could pull that off later and fix it somewhere else if I need to do some soldering or whatever.
It's definitely worth the effort. It's extra time in the front end, but when time comes to have to do more work on it, it makes it that much easier, right?
Definitely. It's completely essential, especially when, like, we have so many games, and it's a constant thing, like, going in there every day. There's always at least those same 5 games that are always having those same problems you have to take care of. Very easy stuff. And then there's always some new stuff going on. Like Spy Hunter was, a big problem because of its, like, melting connectors on the back that nobody could see. And, like, pins that are just being bent in that one. That one's all fixed up now. other things are just bad designs on cabinets too.
There's definitely a lot of that. Like over the year, like we've taken apart, especially like Ultimate Arctic Thunder,
Definitely
Terminator
that
2, anything moves on,
Crazy
other than
Taxi.
Crazy Taxi, Cruisin' USA. It's a long list of things that can fail in anything that moves.
Just bad designs. And like, it's a good thing we don't have coin mechanisms.
Yeah,
could you imagine that?
That's actually a huge element that a lot of arcades, that was such a big element of keeping things up and running, because figure arcades that used to have 150 games, they had to go around every week, clean out the coin buckets. You can't have those coin buckets overflowing,
Right.
otherwise you're going to get jams.
Right.
Every coin mech that would
It's all
fail.
about bringing in the money, so you got to make sure that those coin mechanisms work and not necessarily pay attention too much to the controls and stuff, because you want to bring in as much money as possible.
For sure.
And like, I didn't understand coin mechanisms are so problematic. You got a quarter going through it, and then you have these other places that run nickels through them, and it's like, I'm putting 5 times as many coins through this thing as I normally would. Why am I doing this?
And on top of that, you'd get places like, obviously people are always going to try to cheat the coin mech by
Yeah.
stuffing other various things into the coin mech,
Yeah.
and it all just leads to huge amounts of potential failure. Do you think that's a key thing for arcades of the future? That do you think coinless is the way to go at this point, or?
I certainly would never want to have to deal with coin mechs ever. One of the first things we do is eliminate that problem with our machines. I've heard a lot of the places that are still working coins here in the Chicago area, that's the bane of their existence. They're constantly having to deal with the jams and that sort of thing. So I'm surprised it ever got to be the way it was. You know, I suppose it came from the fact that it was all coin op in the first place, right?
Right.
And it was the easiest way for them to do it, but given that it was electronics guys, the shift when they did the shift from pinball over to arcades, had they not, gotten sucked into having to have the coin mechanism way to do it, they'd have gone around it and had slide cards or anything else other than, the coins. Because it's just
sure, like, they weren't going to be going around. Like, cabinets are out in pizza places and stuff too, so they have to stand alone and collect money somehow. But it's just.
Like, there are definite instances where it has to be coin operated.
Right.
And that's another thing that, again, like going to places like that, if the people aren't maintaining the machine, it can really give a negative look on the arcade scene as a whole, just again, because the cabinets usually aren't kept up to top quality. And that can in part be due to just customers being really rough on them and stuff. Again, however many machines they have out on route, it can be difficult to keep track of so many.
Yeah.
But if you were talking to somebody who was opening up a new arcade, what would you stress as some of the elements that were key in making your arcades successful?
Wow.
Like, it's a definite different time than it was back in the day. So.
Yeah, I guess you can't just drop a bunch of games down and hope for the best, right? You have to have an approach. It seems like you have to have some sort of spin or some way to hook people into it to get them to enjoy it. I mean, they're going to enjoy the games no matter what, but I mean, they come to your place, they've got tremendous variety, right? You got the focus on fighters, you got experts that play the games, you've got all that. We kind of go for an atmosphere thing where we've always got the lights off, so all you're getting is the lights from the games. We've got the music in the background. We'll run movies or whatever that puts your mind back into where you would have been first introducing yourself to these games, to take you back to that part of your youth. So that's kind of our angle on it. Some people like it. Some people find it's not as serious, as very focused on the gaming as like your place is. So it's whatever works. But you definitely got to have something. I don't think you could go anywhere and just drop a bunch of games down and hope for the best. That's not going to fly.
It's and definitely there's been arcades that have opened recently that are they think that was the way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, definitely you can tell the difference between the places that have a true passion for what gaming was in the past and the new place they're just trying to get like a fiscal return on it.
Sure.
And for a lot of those places as well, you can tell a lot from their amount of repairs that they do, or that are kept up on, and what's down. You can tell a lot who's in it for what reason.
It definitely has to be a passion, because if your heart's not in it, you certainly aren't going to take care of the stuff, and you're just going to look at it as it like an asset. So you kind of think of it between the difference between driving your own car and when you're driving a rental car, right? When it's your car, you're going to make sure you change the oil, make sure the tire pressure's right, that sort of thing. When you're driving the rental car, you're like, I'm happy to park it wherever. I don't care if the doors get dinged. Just it's a utility, and that's not the way we feel about these machines, right? Every one of them has a personality. It's like having a kid, right? We just have 70 to 300 kids, so you got to look at it that way. And one of my frustrations before I found your place was I started looking into the arcade scene, and it's like, guys got them. They got them in their basements. They're put on a shrine, and maybe you'll get to play them once a year. You got to know somebody. That was really frustrating for me. So I wanted to bring that basement quality out and make it available to anybody who really had the passion for it. We've kind of positioned ourselves to try and keep it with that passion, because we find that people who just want to come and play them, you can't really have that as much as you'd like. I mean, I'd love to have anybody who's just sees it and wants to do it on a whim. That's great, but we want people that love it as much as we do and are going to take care of it. And it's like over time, it seems like we're building that sort of a client base.
And that's actually, again, it brings up another point of the customers have changed so much, because at our arcade we get people who are 20 years old. They've never been in an arcade, and they've never seen 3/4 of the games that we have. Sometimes, and we've been doing a lot of interviews, there's been people who've come in from high schools and stuff to interview us, and their first question is like, how do you compete with the changing gaming market? Like, it has evolved from where now it's everything, there's so many new games on console. How do you deal with talking to people about and explaining to them why they would want to come play a classic arcade game versus going and playing the new Call of Duty on PlayStation 3?
Yeah. Like, I don't know if I've had to have that conversation with anybody, because usually I'm not really talking to people about it out in the field. It's in the arcade, so they're already in, and they kind of get it. We have an interesting range of ages that show up, and that kind of late teenage to early 20s gauge group doesn't feel as engaged, with certain exceptions. Most of them are coming in, they're kind of like, oh, okay, this is kind of nice, but they grew up with the consoles, and that's their touch point, their perspective on everything. Whereas folks that are my age, we grew up with it in the arcades, and that's the way you got to play the coolest stuff, was to actually get off the couch and go to the arcade. Now it's like we get to the newest generation, these middle schoolers and down, and they've got the console stuff, and they certainly enjoy it, but they come in, and this is like a whole new thing, and they're not put off by the less graphics or the less play. Or the less, I shouldn't say play, because the play is really what it's all about, right? I mean, you get to the simplicity of a Pac-Man or a Frogger, but it has the nature of the game in it, where, okay, it's easy, it's repetitive, but you've got to develop a certain skill set to be successful in the game.
For sure.
And they immediately connect with it. It's awesome.
It's cool. Like, we've definitely had, especially our younger gamers, we find that we have to go a little bit extra, a little bit further with them. A lot of them don't know what to do in the arcade a lot of times. Like, they are used to console gaming right now. Majority of the games are fairly easy. Like, the difficulty level of some of these classic arcade games is so much higher than what they're used to. And a lot of gamers can get very frustrated with getting killed off. And there's some of the games like Donkey Kong, like, there's no continue. There's just like, your game is over and that's it. And I've seen a lot of gamers get put off by that. So especially at Galloping Ghost Arcade, we try to spend a lot of time, we're always walking the floor and really talking with the players about the actual games and trying to help them get better. We've done a few things like with our achievement books, and especially with high scores, to try to help them create them goals and give them specific challenges to really focus on. And like, especially with Mortal Kombat, Brandon, I've seen you go over and seen people just mashing on it. They don't have the same respect for the game because they don't know it.
Yeah, it's really like, you're talking about any of the old ones, like, they don't know the game, even though the game's out now in the newer version of it. Like, they don't understand the old games. They're very, like, I don't even know what they're thinking about it. Like, I love those old games, but like they're hammering on things. They don't know why things work the way they do. People will be smashing down on buttons. Maybe if I hit this button harder, it'll do more damage. Like, they don't work like that. Like even MK9, it's on PlayStation. We have it in the cabinet, but it's still on PlayStation. And it's just hard to see people, like, they see that it's in a cabinet, so they completely forget everything they know about the things they have at home, even about the consoles and stuff.
Right.
They're like, oh, this is on PlayStation? Well, you need to label the buttons for me.
Right.
It's like, it's a PlayStation.
You should be able to figure it out just by the way the buttons act.
No, they don't figure it out. Like, they have no tolerance for figuring that out. They're even in the same layout as the controller, but they still don't figure it out. Very, very weird.
But taking that little bit of extra effort to show them how to play stuff, I think does get them more involved and gets them a little more respectful of the game.
Definitely,
for sure.
Outfoxies, something like that. They don't understand how to play that because it has light guns on the side that doesn't use them in the way that light guns are normally used. But once you show them how to play the game, they're like, man, this is a really awesome game. I really like.
Let's go into that. The Outfoxies cabinet was a game that Outfoxies was released from Namco in 1994. It's a pretty obscure game. There's actually right now, since we got it, now there's been one more arcade that put it out. I believe it was Game Galaxy picked it up, which is awesome. It's one of my favorite games. It's a game similar to the old or the original Smash Brothers game, but it actually came out before, and could be like the start of that whole genre of versus games. Great character selection, but again, it was never ported to a console, not released over here in the States. I had never even heard of it until I found one and imported it, and I watched a video. Somebody had done a MAME run through on it. Seemed like such a cool game. And I think that was probably one of the first projects me and you worked on together.
Yeah, that was our secret project.
We did a big secret release. We were showing pictures of us working underneath drop cloths, and it wouldn't have even really have mattered because nobody knew what the game was going to be anyway.
Right.
And that's another thing that kind of, for me, I'm always kind of looking at the return data of our Facebook posts, and I was getting emails of people like, come on, you can tell me what the secret game is. And we were running that whole promotion for almost, was it like a month almost?
Something like that. It was for a while.
And we went from the board coming in to picking the cabinet, and made a big deal out of it. It was really interesting. And when we finally announced it, we had actually changed how the game technically played. Do you want to talk a little bit about what we did to the cabinet?
It's just a standard 2-button, one joystick, 2-player game, but it's such an interesting game where, like, attacking and stuff, and we really wanted to, like, make it even more than it was, even though it's so much. And like, we put pedals down on the floor, so when you press down on the pedals, it would make the character jump. So like, you actually had to do something with your legs. Put light guns out on holsters on the side of the cabinets, so when you'd pull the trigger on the guns, it would make the characters attack. And we still have the regular 2 buttons on the control panel if you choose to play like that. But the guns really tend to confuse people.
Right.
But like, I pretty much only play with the gun and the pedal, and it makes,
which we refer to as
gun pedal. It makes the game, like, that's how the game is played for me now. Like, it's very weird to play the game with the buttons now. Like, that game is gun and pedal. And that's just how it should be, I think, because it's so cool. There's nothing like that.
Like, and that really changes how, like, you figure if somebody sees it. I remember looking back at games, and I would play stuff that wasn't in a dedicated cabinet. And that's how it's supposed to be then, because that's how you remember it back in the day, and you grew up with it like that. It's interesting to think that in 20 years somebody might be like, oh, if they ever, for whatever reason, come across now at Foxy's cabinet, they'd be confused that it doesn't have this gun pedal set up.
Right.
But again, you had mentioned that people are often confused by that. The difference, though, in adding that, and we spend a lot of time showing people how to actually play that game. I think the game itself, since it is so different than anything else out there, I think it would still confuse people a little bit. But do you think that in showing them the game, what have you seen from the response from the people that have played it?
It's really like, you'll get the people that are like, oh, this is so cool. Like violence in this thing and swords and like slashing people and stuff. Or you'll get people like, this is way too hard. I don't understand this game. And they'll just walk away from it. Which is really disappointing because you know that those people play Smash Brothers at their house and it's essentially the same type of game, but this one, like, this is such a good game and people either love it or they don't give it a chance.
Do you think games like that, there's like no recognizable characters in it?
No, there's no recognizable characters in MK1 when it came out.
Yeah, but the hook in that, and this kind of goes into the future of game design, like in saying, like, without there being a hook character or something, is that why you see so many sequels? Is gaming really leaning towards, for a game to be successful, does it have to pretty much be a sequel? Like, will anything reach, and that's always been a concern for us, especially we're putting out a one-on-one fighting game, that these are going to be all brand new characters for everybody.
It's stuff like that is hard, like you have that with movies and comic books and video games too, like how many Call of Duties are there? They're all the same game, but you just put some new maps and some new guns in it. You take away some perks and you give them some more perks or whatever. You change it up a little bit and people are like, man, I wish this was like the old game that I was playing. And then they buy the next one hoping that it was like the old game that they were playing. I'm like, it's never going to be that game. Just go play that game. That game exists.
Sure. And a lot of it, again, and that comes back, it all circles back to, like, then you have, with arcade games, especially the classic stuff, it doesn't have the same shine to it as the new console games.
Sure.
And even the new arcade games that they do come out with, like Super Street Fighter 4 and King of Fighters, they're now designing arcade games to quickly, and the few arcade games that they do make, they design them to quickly port over to the consoles.
Right.
And that's always been a shame. Like back in my day, our day, we would get a very poorly translated Nintendo version of a game or an Atari 2600 or whatever you want. It's the ports were never anything remotely close to what the arcades were doing.
Look at Atari Pac-Man. Right?
Sure.
I mean, yeah,
Donkey
it was Pac-Man, but
just looking at Qbert over here, and I'm like, man, that thing looks awful.
Had you played much Atari 2600?
No, I've never touched the thing.
See, back when that came out, it was like by the time you were getting home, it was still something though. It was still fun to play.
That was huge. I mean, the run up to Pac-Man coming out was tremendous.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody really wanted it to be what they were used to in the arcade. What Atari, of course, turned out was the best that they could figure out, given the way the hardware limitations were.
And that was in Atari games. Even back then, they were still $50 for an Atari game.
Right.
It's the difference of what an arcade cost then, and what a console cost or a cartridge game cost is like. That's still been the same, but now it's just the hardware that they're using in the arcades is so much less. Like the arcade games, they used to be very expensive for the reason of they made the games so much better than what you could do and sell to a private home use, somebody playing at home. Mm-hmm. And that's what made the arcade scene from a development standpoint work so well, because it's like, here's this game in the arcade cabinet, it'll make you money because this is the one people want to play. This is going to be better than anything that they can get.
Right.
Nowadays, they give a game like Street Fighter, came out in Japanese arcades, it was $27,000 for the cabinet. a single-player cabinet, and you obviously it's a 2-player game. You need a 2-player setup, and then Capcom only sold them in sets of 4, and didn't sell them here in the U.S. anyway. So you're looking at well over $100,000 for a Street Fighter 4 setup, and they gave basically a 6-month window for these arcades to make their money back because they did a near arcade perfect port of it, added 15 to 20 new characters, and gave rebalanced the game, made it play better, online functionality. And it's so unfortunate that arcade developers nowadays don't give arcade owners like you and me the same life expectancy of a game.
Sure.
Like if you had to make $24,000, $27,000 back on an arcade cabinet,
It'd be a long time coming.
For sure.
Right.
And just especially again with the pay at the door, like it's a different business model, and I don't think that the arcade scene has really changed well with the times.
I think that works in Japan, where they're pumping fists full of money into things, but here, like, it's not the same.
For sure. Like, what do you think? Do you think that arcade developers will change their business models ever? Like, what you've been doing, what we've been doing, all the other arcades, like, there's people want to go to arcades. Like, I think that's pretty evident. And I don't think that the arcade industry really knew that. And I think once we opened, everybody in the industry was like, you guys having redemption games? And we'd be like, absolutely not. And they're like, you're going to be closed in 2 months. And I was pretty confident in the business model. I was like, yeah, you guys wait and see what we're going to do.
Uh-huh.
Opened up, went over very well.
Right.
And been growing since we opened constantly. Do you think that seeing what we're doing, what you're doing, do you think that the arcade scene and developers will start to change and try to help rejuvenate the arcade scene?
I don't know if the arcade scene itself will change. I mean, it's got its own thing happening. But the way that arcade developers need to look at it is it's a whole new market, one that they're not trying to tap, other than the way they're doing it with the redemption stuff. Sure. Certainly there's an untapped market of people who want to play stuff, they want to play it in a social setting, and the barrier can no longer simply be that there has to be a certain level of equipment. You can do pretty much anything in the house that you could do in an arcade at this point. Even when you're looking at consoles with the Kinect system or any of that, you could try and constrain it with special controls, but like we've seen games in the arcades where it's hand activated or motion sensitive, and those don't seem to be monumental hits. Like a Pac-Man came out and they 50,000 units in a year, that sort of thing. It's just, where is that going to be now, right? Right. And it's like, so it's not the technology anymore. It's got to be the gameplay, and it's going to take some real effort for them to figure out novel ways of having people play games to pull people in for the new stuff.
For sure.
At the arcade, they get a lot of people. We don't have Skeeball at the arcade. Like, people want to play Skeeball.
Sure.
Would people play Skeeball were it not giving tickets out?
Just to roll the ball, like bowling?
Just to throw the ball into those cups or whatever?
Sure.
Like,
it's definitely like redemption stuff. Some people honestly, they play Skeeball for score. It's not the same thing though, and you're looking at such a wide range of why people want to play Skeeball.
Like, that's the only redemption game I ever hear requested.
Yeah.
At the arcade. Like, other than that, it's just like air hockey or something like that. But Skeeball is like by far the top requested thing, and it's like, it's not an arcade game, but it's a redemption game, and redemption games, cause their own problems.
Sure.
But it's just like, I wonder if people would be receptive to ticketless Skeeball games.
Well, and that I think without any question people would play it.
Yeah.
It's been interesting watching, like, people will play anything. Like,
That's true.
It doesn't really matter what it is, especially you throw it on free play. And that's been one of the great things. It's like people are definitely trying a lot of new games that they've never tried before.
That's important. Like, even anything in our arcade, pay to get in, and then say you wanted to play Robotron or whatever, and that's your number one game, and some guy's playing it, go play whatever's next to it, Defender or whatever, for a couple minutes while this guy's doing it, because you don't have to waste your money on that game because it's free play.
Right.
And maybe you'll start liking that game. Maybe you'll try something you never tried before.
And going back to Foxy's, that's a great example. The game itself, even the if you watch the whole intro and the whole front end of the game, knowing what it is, you can appreciate it. But I think the average person just watching it is gonna be like, man, I don't know what this is, and just walk right past it. But having it on free play, it's like, why not? I'll start it up and see what it's all about. Right. And I think that's really lent a huge. And we get people that drive in when we hold out Foxy's tournaments. We have people drive in from out of state, like from Indiana and Wisconsin, and people make the trip for it because now we're building the cult following for that game. And that's something that back in the day I don't think ever would have happened. You can definitely, especially with the tracking of high scores. I know Scott, you're very big into tracking high scores as well. Yep. It's another element. Back in the day, there was no real score tracking at the arcades I went to.
Right, just initials in the machine, and that was it.
That was it. How much has that helped your arcade bring customers back and get people more interested in games that they maybe haven't played?
It definitely adds the competitive element. And some folks really don't care, but the majority of folks, which surprised me, I didn't expect it to be this much of a draw for it. A lot of people will come through, and they'll take a walk through the arcade just to look at the high scores and really get their head around what people are playing on those games. And it's kind of cool to see. I mean, I personally can't hit scores on anything. I'm terrible at it. But to watch people come in and do it, they get really excited. And you get people that haven't been in an arcade in 30 years, and they'll come in and they'll actually take a run at a game, and they'll spend the entire afternoon at that game, and by the time it's done, they'll have gotten their skills back, we're back to taking them back to their childhood, but everything comes back to them like riding a bike. They had a guy come in that hadn't touched a Missile Command machine in 30 years, and here he was on the floor, played it once. He was somebody that came in with his kids, thought, I'm going to show the kids the arcade, I don't really want to play one of those folks, and saw that here's his game from when he was a kid, got on it, didn't leave it all day, quadrupled the high score by the end of the day. And that's awesome. Huge sense of accomplishment. It was very cool to see.
Is it and we have, especially at the Galloping Ghost Arcade, we've got a lot of people, a lot of our regulars are rabid score chasers. And that's probably been the biggest draw for people becoming year members, has been the scoring system. We have a few people, one or two of the regulars, they just come in, they play pinball. It's not so much about scores, but I'd say probably 90% of our regulars, it's all high scores. And I think with Orcade is another element that has really helped propel just us in general and getting notoriety about. We have 100 and some world records that have been set at our place now. And I think people come in to see that. And I think that's just another element that a lot of arcades don't do it still. And it's really unfortunate.
Sure.
Because they have these games. It is a lot of extra effort in tracking the scores. But I think it really pays off in the long run.
It's definitely worthwhile.
Yeah.
It turns people on. It allows us to connect with the other arcades, so we get to take the social scene and to expand it beyond our own doors. It's made a huge difference for us in working the tournaments with you guys. People get all really excited. They'll come in just to watch, and it's neat. People really get engaged.
And there's, in dealing with other arcades that have been around for a long time, it's been one of the unfortunate elements is that we've found that a lot of arcades are. I don't want to say they're stuck in their old ways, but they're either too busy or whatever to really do events with us, which is totally unfortunate. Because again, running our events, and we've had our 3-on-3-on-3 with Game Grid out in Utah. I think that was really a cool event.
Yeah.
And creating and growing the inner arcade relationships that we've been growing, I think has been really helpful in getting more people to get involved and go in and set scores. And that's really what, again, it perpetuates the whole thing. Because the bigger somebody sees somebody play X-Men, they're like, oh, I used to beat that on a quarter back in the day. I'm going to come in and take all the scores from everybody.
Yep.
And I think more of that is a definite... It has to happen if it's going to keep going the way it's going.
Game Grid is like a good example of something like that's quarters. Like they're in a mall, and they don't put up a lot of scores, and like that's, you could tell from like just even them, the whole quarter thing. I mean, they have a bad location, like they can't be open all night. They're in a mall kind of setup, but like their repeat customer, it's difficult for them, even with their whole scoring system, and it's like...
And they're definitely... like the coin-op thing, our guys can sit and play there all day and just rack up whatever score they get to practice and practice and practice.
Right.
And coin-operated, it's definitely different.
Yeah.
There's definitely people out there that are interested in it, but again, there's different limitations. Like, I don't know, do you think a coin-operated arcade can be successful in today's day and age?
It seems like the guys that are true coin-op are pretty few and far between. The ones that are out there usually have something that goes along with it. They've either got redemption stuff going on, or a lot of them have a bar attached. And it doesn't seem that the coin-op method stands alone very well. By dropping the barrier of having to pump money into the machines, it allows people that freedom to play it. And like we were saying earlier about finding a new game. I mean, when I first came into the Ghost, the thing I really wanted to do was play the 4 or 5 classics that stuck out from my childhood. And because I had invested, the gate fee, I had no trepidation whatsoever in trying all sorts of different stuff that I never would have touched back in the day. And now it's like all of a sudden something that had just a couple of things to attract me to it now has hundreds. Right. And I could spend months working my way through the catalog and getting to know each game personally, because a lot of these games have that level of depth and you've really got to go get into it. I mean, Outfoxies, for example, something I never would have looked at. But I followed along with you guys on Facebook as you were doing your thing. Was all excited just like everybody else was. Watched it as you guys opened it up. It's like, this is fantastic, and it was really there. It was very cool. And now, if it was a quarter game with that sort of introduction, I certainly would have played it back then. So the game is there. It's just getting the introduction to the game needs to have that barrier eliminated where you're being coin conscious.
Right. It's what do you think has been your most game that you were interested in seeing how it was going to do? Like, we've put out some ridiculously obscure games that nobody's ever heard of, and there's somewhere we'll put them out and be like, oh, I don't even know if I want to do a Facebook post on this thing. And it'll turn around, there'll be people that are playing it before I can get back to the computer, and it's like having fun on it, and it's like, wow, like who would have thought that they would have loved this game?
Sure. One of our biggest surprises was Macross. I mean, yes. I didn't know anything about shooters at all coming into this, which is kind of a sad thing given what I do for a living now. And I had picked it up with a bunch of other games in the process. I'm like, okay, it works. It's something I'm not going to have to worry about. I can park it on the side there. It's one more game for people to play while they're waiting for somebody to get off a Pac-Man. That was the concept in my head. And I got to talking to you about it, and some of your guys came out, and we really got wrapped around the fact that it's an amazing game. Yeah. And it certainly gets everything it deserves now.
Do you find it, like, now that you've been buying games, like,
yep.
You got 70, like, do you find it difficult to not buy for yourself and buy for the people?
Yeah. It's kind of like having the family. There's something I want to do or something the kids want to do, and you wind up with a balance. Now, luckily with 70 pieces, we're at the point where I pretty much have everything I really wanted, have my heart set on. So it's a lot easier now to find things that people are requesting for sure.
Do you have what are some of the if you had to name one that any obscure game that you're like, on the fence about thinking about buying or like not sure how it would do. Like, you know, if you put like Sinistar out on the floor,
Yeah,
that's going to go over really well.
Right. That's an easy one. But there definitely have been several games where people have come in and asked. There was a gentleman who came in, and I think it's a game called Snow Brothers.
Sure.
Okay. And I never even remotely heard of such a thing. But I pulled it up just to see what it was. And it's like, okay, this is playable. And I set it up for him to play on MAME just so he could relive his childhood.
Sure.
I was like, here, go ahead, knock yourself out. And he played it. The guy watching him played it. It's like, all of a sudden, you get that interest going. So now I'm kind of like, yeah, there's got to be a Snow Brothers machine around here someplace.
Sure.
And when I find it, we'll have it.
That's that one. And I know that like there's Snow Brothers. I think there's Snow Brothers 2.
Right.
It's we've gotten some requests for that one.
Mm-hmm.
And I know me and you, Brandon, we've talked about ordering some pretty out there games. There was
Mock Breakers.
Mock Breakers, which is kind of a almost like a
So they're
messed up
1994 Namco.
track and field. Track and field from Namco in '94,
Yes.
only released in Japan. Some weird stuff going on at Namco.
Going
Namco,
down the
Japan.
street towing like this giant Godzilla thing behind you.
Or catching a missile and throwing it back out and
Yeah.
seeing where it explodes. And that was another one we were discussing, doing a very custom, ridiculous cabinet for with.
Yeah.
How are you
pedals and-
finding, like, so that's a fairly obscure title, right?
Yeah.
How is it that pops up onto your radar? I mean, are you...
It's eBay, and I'm constantly going through KLOV. At this point, it's like, if I've never heard of it, I want to know what it is.
Right.
And Mock Breakers was definitely one of those. Because it's like, there's YouTube videos for everything, or you can always check it out on
Sure.
MAME. And that was one, if I'm standing there and I'm like, I don't even understand what I'm looking at, and it's really funny, and usually I'll be like, man, I'll try it, because we can promote it in such a way where somebody's gonna like it.
Right.
And there's some obscure, like the Godzilla board was another one that we brought in, and that's I'm a huge Godzilla fan. The Godzilla game from Bam Presto in 93, not a great game.
No, it's really, really mechanical. Like
Very
you're,
rough
like,
controls.
controlling
Visually,
giant robots.
it's okay, but people come in from everywhere to play it.
Really?
Because it's
And
Godzilla.
the marketing on it for us, you go to the Godzilla forum and you tell them, hey, does anybody know that there's a Godzilla arcade game and you can only come play it here? And everybody's like, there's bigger Godzilla fans out there than I am,
Right.
and they'll travel to go play stuff like that. We've done stuff with, and those are what we call our niche games, like Jackie Chan, Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah.
We get people that come in. Megaman is another one. Like,
Very branded stuff.
few people know that there's a Megaman arcade game,
Yeah.
and huge following for it. And those are almost fairly safe. Like right now, I've been watching. There was a Pretty Sailor Moon arcade game that I don't follow Sailor Moon at all, but know there's a huge following for it. And it's kind of the difference of, like, it's not something I would play. It's a beat 'em up game. Looks kind of funny. No, it's been around forever. I know a lot of people would come in to play it. Again, not something
Not your thing.
would
but
go into
there's
my
certainly a
collection
crowd
or
for it,
anything,
right?
but I'm sure we could get a lot of people for that. Like, do you?
I don't think we're there yet, right? I mean, you're almost 400 pieces, so you're kind of at that point where you've saturated a lot of the old stuff, and now you're like looking for the new, very niche focused
Sure.
things.
Scud
We're
Hammer.
like, boy, I need to get.
Scud Hammer.
Scud Hammer,
Yeah.
another great title.
And I'm still trying to find a battle zone, right? Because I want to have that collection
good game.
filled out. So we'll get there. I don't know if we'll get there in the building we're in, because we're now starting to get to the point where I'm creatively shoehorning things in. I've kind of watched the way that you kind of stacked the deck and made your
Open up
arrangement.
the underground.
Yeah.
Downstairs.
We'll have to put stuff in the basement. You know,
Yeah.
we've got that Sinistar we were talking about earlier. It's
Yeah.
in the basement.
Yeah.
It'll be coming out soon. We'll put it on the floor.
Huge draw. I think it's great that there's now so many other ways to promote arcades, and that's been another surprising thing. a lot of arcades, they don't, in my opinion, like, what do I know? But I don't think they really promote themselves right and really reach out to the players and again, as I said, other people in the industry, and try to do cool events and stuff. They just kind of like, we're an arcade, we're here, people want to play, they'll come in. And I know you've been pretty heavy on events, and some of them scoring, some of them, I know for Halloween you were doing some stuff. And
yeah, recently we had a movie showing, so we had a arcade collector movie screening where we came out, and the movie's coming out on pay-per-view. It's called The Space Invaders, and it's coming out in April. But the producers of the movie allowed us to have a pre-run where we could show it to folks, and people came in. It helped our Saturday. So we want to have. We were kind of addressing the collector community that way, and we're trying to find the right balance between making sure that we get people in the doors so we can keep the doors open, and not oversaturating ourselves, right? Because we don't want to get to the point where you're 6 deep for a game. I mean, I remember back in the day, you wanted to play Defender. The week it came out, you were waiting all night and you played it once. Or like the Dragon's Lair. It was weeks before you could play that game.
Sure.
And we're trying to keep from getting there. I guess it begs the question, is the market there that you could be too busy? But we want to find that balance. We want people to come in and be comfortable with their play, not have to worry about, we're here at MGC and it's kind of like walking through the crowds. It's big crowds. A huge crowd of people here. And I don't want it to get too crowded. Right? We want people to be comfortable.
For sure. Another thing with the like when you're buying a game, like is there like as arcade buyers we look for stuff on we try to get as many games for our dollar as possible.
Sure.
Is there, how much does price factor in for you in buying a game?
There's definitely a perspective of getting into a game. Can you get out of it if you have to?
Sure.
And you certainly can't buy anything that's outrageously priced. You can't buy stuff. Certainly, if someone's a collector and they're going to put a perfect piece in their basement, they're going to be able to pay more for it. So, we've got to be conscious with spreading the money around. Now, a lot of our acquisitions over the last couple of months have been pinballs, and that's a whole different world.
For sure.
Right? I mean, I've kind of told people it's almost a factor of 10 to 1, where we could fill a ton of arcade games for what it takes to put one pin in.
Right.
And that extends to even the maintenance, back to that conversation, right? Pinball absolutely requires more maintenance than the arcades do. So, it's hard to strike a perfect balance.
And I bring it up, like you mentioned Dragon's Lair, like people used to be able to tell, they would spend the money on a Dragon's Lair cabinet because the game was 75 cents to $1 to play.
Right.
How much do you watch what people are playing? Like, would you, like Dragon's Lair again, you open it up and there's $600 inside the coin bucket or whatever, you're leaving Dragon's Lair there. Is there ever a point where you'd consider taking a game off the floor just because it's not getting
doesn't
play?
make money?
And do you monitor that very much?
The only game I've ever taken out so far, well, actually, I take that back. We've had a couple games we've taken off, mostly because they don't work. We can't get them to the point where they're reliable. So we have a game, Leland Viper. I've still got the game, it's in a back room, but to make it reliable was really difficult. And it really wasn't getting the draw. I mean, people would come in, everybody would touch it, but it didn't draw people to it. And we took it off the floor to see if there was any reaction. Nobody missed it. So it sits on the side. Maybe someday we'll go through it, make it bulletproof, and it'll come back out. But like Choplifter, a ridiculously difficult game. We had that one on the floor. Nobody ever played it. I had bought the piece because it was in a Burger Time cabinet with the intention of turning it back into a Burger Time and moving Choplifter over into some other cabinet. And now we've kind of started that process. Choplifter will someday come back onto the floor just because it's a cool game, even if it's ridiculously difficult.
Right.
So we're kind of in the position where we've got the space. It doesn't make it too hard for us to take things off the floor. So the only reason we're taking it off is it's going to provide a negative experience like Viper did, or we want to use the piece for something else, in which case the game will return later, reincarnated.
Yeah.
Right.
For the most part, I think, I don't know if I've seen a game where nobody's ever played it. Like, even where it's like, oh yeah, that game gets no action ever. games.
Like even
somebody plays everything.
For sure. Yeah. They'll give it a try, and especially now with the scoring, again, going back to the scoring element of it, people are so happy to have a score.
Yeah, right.
We have scores on virtually everything. Because somebody, and that's really been another thing that has, again, when we put a new game out, we recently put out a game called Metal Black, which was a Taito shooter. None of our regulars had ever even heard of it. Was a cool, wasn't part of the Darius series. It kind of felt like it could have gone with it, but it was actually the first game to use like the clashing beam system that a lot of the later shooters
cool.
use. Really cool. We had a group of 3 new customers. It was Brian Kidda, George Gaynor, and Nick Young were all in there one night, and we put it up and we let them play it, and they got the Arcade World Record on it. And in doing that, that made that game so important to them, because then they started playing. They played it all night. They were all going back and forth, taking each other's scores, and I took the score that night. All 3 of them came back in, and they did it the same thing the next day. But that really got them into scoring. And when you bring in games that, like a game like Pac-Man or Donkey Kong, that the average person isn't going to come in and put up a new score, and I think that's a really cool element to get more and more people involved in scoring.
Definitely. We have a lot of anticipation out there for when certain machines, I mean, I don't have a place really where I can put the games to keep people from seeing what's coming down the pipe in my repair list, so they can see it, and they're always asking, when's this one coming? And a lot of the times it's because they want to put a score up.
Right.
We've definitely got a certain crowd of folks who they'll come in specifically because we've just introduced a new title. Normally they'll come on a Saturday, but they'll show up on a Tuesday just to get on the machine and get a score up, so they have that score for a while.
Right.
Which is great. We want to make it so everybody has a goal they're shooting for. And one of the things that people, they get lost in. They get lost in the fact that the high score is the be all end all, and they don't try and work against themselves to make sure they're a better player. Right?
For sure.
We've got guys now that are starting to get that. It's like you don't have to battle Billy Mitchell for the Pac-Man score. You've got to battle yourself. So get your 10,000 and then your 20 and your 30. You build. That's your improvement. That's where you're fighting against.
Yeah. And again, like with that, our regulars have really. It's been great watching that as well. Like there's been right now we've probably got 8 regulars that are in. Seemingly almost every day of the week, with Matt Rocco, Matt Walters, James White, Duke Dang, Chris Teeter, Fred DeHart, Ian Paulus. It's like those guys have formed they didn't know each other before the arcade, and now they're always all hanging out together, and it's great seeing that. And like I'm sure your guys too. Like they're probably. It takes a little while. Like it's taken us. Yeah.
They all recognize each other, right? It's a very cordial kind of relationship. It's very cool to see it. It's like because none of these people knew each other before we existed. Yet they all probably are fairly closely located, right? And even when guys that are normally at the Ghost come and visit us, they have the notoriety and everybody's friendly. It's a very cool kind of a environment to see
like
people
the arcades you went to back in the day. Was it like did you know people like, oh, there's that guy who has that score?
Yeah. I didn't have enough money to frequent the arcades back in the day, so on the rare times when I did get it to go in, usually I was with a buddy, and you'd play against your buddy, or you'd play your favorite game. We didn't have quite that atmosphere, and being a very poor scorer that I am, I never really got to know the guys who could do the big numbers. Yeah, I missed out on that.
Do people who go into your arcade think just by nature that you're tremendous high-scoring player?
It's one of those, they assume you can do it until you prove that you can't, which is why you very rarely see me playing a game unless I just fixed it and I'm making sure everything functions correctly. Yeah, I try and stay off the stuff. Every once in a while, before the doors open, we have all the lights on and you can see everything with its warts. I'll go through and remember what my favorite game was and I'll go play it.
And that's been another element that I've found to actually be a very positive thing is like, regardless of if they know you or not, they seem to enjoy trying to take down one of the owner's scores.
Sure.
Like you're the head guy there, and if they can knock you
I wish
down
I
a
could.
peg,
I wish I
it's-
could present a challenge. I mean, you know how to play, so you're really good at that. I'm very easy to fold up. I mean, I'm more than happy. Anybody wants to come in and play against me? Sure, I'll play a game against you, but be prepared to win.
Yeah. I think that they enjoy that more. Like it doesn't even like we'll have like Jerry puts up scores and they're not record breaking by any means, but like people be like, oh wow, I beat one of the owners of this place. That's really cool. And it doesn't matter if it was him playing against him in Mortal Kombat. They just like to it gives
have that
them
feather?
kind of a little bit of confidence boost
Sure.
and I think that's cool. I know you've had people go after your Lucky and Wild score,
Yeah.
and and your people, they just seem to like that when they're taking down. They
want
think
to
that
see other people unhappy. I think that's what it is.
That's right. The arcades
Like,
are
that's
about
the-
I
unhappiness.
had the first one was Need for Speed, and some guy came in, or some kid or whatever, came in and took that. I took it back immediately, and then Ken, the pinball guy, he was going in on it, and he was taking it, and all three of us were going back and forth, and then I actually had to change the way I was playing, which was stupid, and then I came out on top, obviously, and then Lucky and Wild was just like, I didn't think that I was going to be good at the game. I had said at one point that getting through one level on one credit would have been completely impossible. And then now I can get up to like level 4, no problem, in one credit. But I think Nick Young was going after
Yes.
that back and forth. And
Rocco was in on it for a little bit. And
yeah, Chris
was-
Delutri, he had a pretty good score. And
I think what it is though is because we're in this arcade environment, they think that that's all we do is like just play the games day in and day out.
Yeah,
and
like people are always like, "Oh, you must love working here. You get to play games." Like I don't really play any of the games.
right, like you maybe get a game a
Right.
day when you're working. It's like Philip On, who was kind enough to join us here at Midwest Gaming Classic this weekend. People challenge him in Mortal Kombat,
Yeah.
expecting him to be an MK2 master, and they think that, well, he's Shang Tsung.
Yeah.
Of course, this is going to be really hard. And he hasn't played the game since like '94.
What was the last game you played? It was like Pac-Man or something.
he
Space
said
Invaders, right? Yeah.
And it's like,
Man, that was a long time ago.
there's a lot of misconceptions that it's funny, but I think with that, their outlook and getting to watch the people and recognizing difference, like the casual gamers and the hardcore gamers definitely have a very drastic viewpoints, and kind of gearing like the Outfoxies cabinet again, like that was very much geared to both casual and hardcore, like promoting that the way that they did. It really hit both demographics that we really focus toward. Like a lot of arcades, they focus towards kids or adults. Like you'll have the barcades, they focus on the adults. Redemption places focus on kids. Definitely for us, since we've opened, it's always been, doesn't matter the age, it's casual arcade goer, hardcore arcade goer. And focusing and promoting stuff towards that, I think has really been beneficial for us. But we have to keep it very balanced because casuals come and go. The bigger hardcore scene that you can get coming back, they'll be there all the time, which is, it's interesting. It's interesting. Have you had, when you're doing promotions, like is there any, what do you look for when you're doing your promotional stuff? Do you gear it that way? Do you just kind of throw it out there?
I think most of our promotional stuff has been there to kind of engage the folks who are already interested, and we want to kind of really enhance their experience. So it's primarily been the tournament stuff, where there's new ways to score, new people to meet, that sort of thing. We don't do a lot of promotion where we're trying to engage folks that are outside of the community and bringing them in raw. I mean, we're in a fairly decent location where we get a lot of folks that will come in that drove by, saw us, we're meaning to come in, eventually they show up and they're like, oh my God, it really is an arcade. And then now they're back, right? Because it's like seeing a dodo bird. They almost don't recognize it anymore because they're gone. And we had somebody come in, I guess, yesterday who had been doing the drive-by, and we have a small frontage on the main drag, but then our building extends back 100 feet, right? So it looks tiny from the front, and then we're really deep. We got a huge parking lot, and he's like, "Oh my God, it's not the 6 machines you could see through the front windows. It's the 60 machines that stand behind it that really take you back." So, you know, he's kind of back to promotion. We're real light on promotion. You know, we don't want to get over ahead of ourselves. It's just me and my family, so we're not prepared to handle massive crowds, right? We're not really comfortable with it. Everybody packed shoulder to shoulder. We kind of gets like that maybe on Saturdays, on a busy Saturday, but otherwise it's pretty quiet. And we kind of encourage people. It's like, if you like what you're doing and you want to play this, but have it a little more personal experience, come during the week. You can have the place to yourself sometimes. And it's, I mean, imagine having that as a kid. You were just like, this is fantastic.
Right.
And now you can exist today. And you just have the run of it, you know? So.
What, like, again, to perpetuate things, and we're going to be wrapping up in a few minutes, do you think, what do you think needs to happen or can be done for other arcades opening? Like, what direction do you think the industry needs to go in to make it continue on and grow?
So from the operator perspective, it definitely seems to be figure out what your client base is and then service that client base. And I guess if your client base is kids, then it makes sense for you to have that redemption stuff. Or if your client base is strictly adults that are in that hanging out in the bars age, then it makes sense for you to be a barcade. Don't try to be a bar that doesn't have alcohol. That doesn't work. Don't try to jam redemption games down adults' throats if that's not what they want to play. And it's just like any business, right? What would you like? And we'll see how we can make that work for you.
Yeah. Well, and Brandon, what do you think some places need to do to keep everything going the way it's going with the rejuvenation of the arcade scene?
I don't know. Like, they just design things so poorly, man. Like, they're just terrible. They're just terrible.
The way they lay the games out, or
the way that the games are.
Like
the cabinets themselves most of the time. Like, especially the new stuff. Like, a lot of new games are driving games or shooting games, which are the 2 worst things to work on.
For sure.
And
again, the life expectancy, the last even 10 years.
Oh,
the turnover
definitely.
rate of these games is like, you don't see those games anymore because they put out a new edition of it.
Right, it's the same game.
It's pretty much the same game. They almost want the old one to fail, get the new one.
Obsolete, but
where's the innovation in the game itself? Right.
That's right, kind of out the window. And there's like with the Golden Tee Golfs and the Silver Strike bowlings and Fast and the Furious, all those big buck hunters. Those have sustained the industry for the past decade. It's like, it's a ridiculously long time. Like, we don't get the King of Fighters games and the Super Street Fighter games over here. We get just the very bare bones
stuff.
Like, this is what's going to keep a Chuck E. Cheese style place open, is by throwing these games.
You're gonna throw it in a bar or whatever, you know, like.
But game design, like the interior game design aside, I think that's almost more, I don't know if I'd say it's intentional, but it meets the need of what's out there. I do agree that needs to change. Like we gotta fix something every day.
Yeah.
Like, come on. Bad design.
They were definitely trying to figure things out back in the day. I mean, you look at an Atari AR2 power supply.
Sure.
And that was experimentation at its best, right?
It's not even the electronics. It's like the mechanics of the thing. We've been designing mechanisms for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Come on.
I suppose.
Like, we've had springs for a very long time now.
There's been definitely a lot of ill-designed cabinets over the years, but hopefully at this point, like, we have to motivate developers to get back into doing some innovative stuff and
something cool.
It's we'll have to see what happens.
Like, I'm all about, like when we're building something custom, for like the cocktail table or any kind of cool custom cabinet, like there's always something else you could add to it that would just make it so much cooler. Like when you have Arctic Thunder and it's blowing air at you instead of it just being like some racing game. Now it's blowing air at you, the seat vibrates and rumbles, it's got lights all over it.
Right.
That's cool, and like
those little things that really
they really do help out.
For sure.
Like, that's just awesome.
Cool.
Interesting. It's an interesting perspective.
Him especially very technical. He looks at the small details, which is
with the game.
Yeah, it's a lot different from what a lot of people see, I'm sure. Like they're looking at the outside and it's just like, oh, this game is whatever. Me, I'm like on the inside of this thing going, oh man.
Cool. Well, I guess we can start wrapping it up. Do you have anything else you wanted to add, or?
Nothing comes to mind.
No? You should give your location
Give
and
a plug. Do the plug.
Give your plug.
Sure. 1 East Main and East Dundee. We're about 5 minutes off of I-90, where it crosses the Fox River. Come on by. Come on by during the week.
And
we'll have the place,
website.
The website. UndergroundRetrocade.com. No space in the middle. Just do a search for Underground Retrocade on Facebook. It's the best way to get involved. Come like us, and then you'll hear about all the new stuff that's happening.
Very cool. Brandon?
I don't know. What else is there to say?
Well, I want to thank you personally. Like, you've done so much at the arcade and have been such a huge help in keeping everything up and running and bringing some much needed innovation to the scene on both the arcade scene and productions. And Scott, I want to thank you for helping perpetuate the whole arcade scene. Like, everybody just says, I have not made it out to your place yet, but I look on Yelp. Everybody just raves about your place, and you're doing an awesome thing, keeping all the old machines up and running, and giving people a place to go play the classics and some new stuff.
For us, we're just doing it the way you did it. So.
Cool. Well, again, thank you both. And this is Doc Mack with the Galloping Ghost Arcade and Galloping Ghost Productions podcast. It's March
24th.
March
24th. Time flies.
And more so need the month. March 24th, and we are doing this podcast from the
Midwest
2013 is what I'm looking for. Midwest Gaming Classic. Also, we do want to give a shout out and thanks to Retroids again for having us out here and hooking us up with our space and everything. So thanks, everybody, and we hope to see you at the arcade soon.